Yeah, thank you so much. I have here on stage with me two great men, Ben Wagner and Kave Salamatian. Ben Wagner is the director of the Center for Internet and Human Rights, and his research focuses on freedom of expression, surveillance technology, internet governance, and internet foreign policy. And for those of you who've been here already with the previous session, Kave Salamatian is probably not unknown. He's a professor for computer science at the University of Savoie, and his main areas of research are internet measurement and modeling and networking information theory. So, Ben, Kave, in 2011, many governments were very excited about the power of internet as a tool for political campaigning and for mobilizing people. And all over the media, one could read about the so-called Twitter and Facebook revolution in the Arab world. Today, the picture looks quite different. The tool that was once celebrated as a means to empower people is now the weapon of merciless terrorists that are recruiting people online through Facebook or other social media. What happened?
So thank you very much, and thank you for so many people coming. It's nice to see such a full room. I hope it's not just because we put Nutella and Kittens in the title, but you're also interested in the topic. I think a lot has happened, and I mean, there's no news to everybody in the room that there's been a long debate about the revolutionary or non-revolutionary or otherwise useful properties of social media. And I think it's interesting to see that the media debate on these issues changes with the winds every 6 months. And on the one day it'll be a terrible thing, on the next day it'll be a great thing. And I've been consistently asking the last few days, is the social media, is this internet thing, is it going to be a terrible thing or is it going to be a wonderful thing? And is it going to be a fantastic change for everything or are we going to be end and dying? And I don't want to insult the audience, which is very smart here, by answering any of those questions, because the uncomfortable answer is, as usual, it depends. And we're going to try and have a conversation about something that isn't quite so covered in most of these debates, which is specifically recruitment through social media sites by radical organizations such as ISIS. And some of the recruitment strategies also, as has been discussed quite prominently in media, because you need to get clicks and sell newspapers somehow, includes Nutella and Kittens as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. Kave, in your current research, you set up fake Facebook profiles in order to attract recruiters. Can you tell us a little bit more about your experiment?
So, first of all, I should thank Ben and Lea to inviting me. I was attracted by the Nutella, and when I arrived,
everyone
just
was.
tell me that I have to speak about ISIS, so I'm a little, wondering where is the Nutella. Anyway, the study that we did some months ago was a study that were coming out of one question. We're wondering how ISIS is recruiting young people, generally between the age of 15 to 21. A large percentage of them, people that had not any contact with Islam before, and that over a short period of time moved from the kind of typical behavior that you can see in some youngsters or teenager to kind of radicalist people going to Syria and doing awful things. Our assumption was that these people should have, by some way, their rationality changed or altered by some way, and wanted to understand what was happening. So we tried to do a kind of simple experience, which was we took Facebook and we make 100 fake profile with people with different names. Some are European, some more Maghrebin or Muslim names, some with pseudo. And we choose for each one of these people a kind of typical type of profile that a youngster between the age of 15, 17 will have in Europe. Some people being interested about some cause, for example, animal pain or animal experiment. Some other being interested about, Palestine. Some other being interested about poverty. Some other being interested about some religion. Some other being interested going to a group like I am fat and I hate myself. And we choose for each one of these people a set of cause to like. And these people liked some cause. And during 3 days, we let a human person to operate this page. And after that, what we do was just following the advice of Facebook. So we just accepted every proposition that Facebook gave us. Be friend with this, be friend with this, be friend with this. And we do this for 130-something profile. And after it began from 10 to 15 days, we had some of this profile that had contact with ISIS recruiter, saying that, are you interested to change your life and go to do something in Syria and so on. And it was quite disturbing for us because no one of these shown extremist viewpoint. How the recruiter from ISIS has been able to catch these people and propose them. And we figure out that the recommendation algorithm of Facebook is doing very well its job. The recommendation algorithm of Facebook is trying to find people that have liked similar web page as you, similar cause as you, have similar friend as you. And it occurred that if you are a recruiter for one of this group, maybe one good way is just to choose a set of cause of interest that are interesting for people that might have some kind of failure at some point or some kind of issues, and just to contact the people that the recommendation algorithm is proposing you. And it gets into a kind of more deep process of trying to understand what is happening, and I will be discussing after that on the next slide. We have the next one? Yes. So, what was the process that was happening in this context, and what was the issue that was existing? All in all, a recommendation system is a system that is taking a concrete case, a concrete person, and it's transforming this person into a fairy tale person, a kind of person that fits with a model, a person that can be described by a set of parameters, like his age, his gender, the place that he lives, his name, the cause that he have liked. And he began to behave with this person, not like the way that this person is, but based on the image that he has built of this person. So meaning that if a person is following the profile that he has, he is normal. And if he's not following the profile that he has, he's paranormal. He's an outlier and should be put aside. So meaning that this recommendation system is pushing you in somewhat to become similar to the profile that they have built for you. If they assume that you are a person that has a given profile, you have to go into the normal distribution, unless you want to become this paranormal ghost that is shown.
Does it actually apply only to ISIS or also to other terroristic groups?
Interesting thing is that when we begin the study, our main objective was to look at the recommendation systems. And we end up figuring out that the people are not only contacted by ISIS, they are also contacted by any other extremist group. For example, some of them were contacted by I will say, for example, Scientology church. Some of them were contacted by Mormons. Some of them were contacted by extremist Jewish. Some of them were contacted by anarchists. Quite interestingly, sometimes you had completely contradictory contact. The same guy being contacted by the Association of Free Thinker, and at the same time being contacted by ISIS.
So you're saying that all of these radical groups use the same tactics? Or?
All of these radical groups are using marketing tools, And we have wonderful marketing tools that are at our hand. And what is the objective of marketing tools? Is that you are not interested in buying, for example, a hairdryer. You have no idea of buying a hairdryer. You go to a website, and touch by touch, you have the idea that your hair may be wet, and maybe and you end up buying a hairdryer, meaning that your rationality is changing from don't want to buy this to I want to buy this. And just to give you another example that is quite interesting, there was an experiment that was described to me by one of my colleagues. He was saying that somebody goes to a website and was interested to buy a white rope to put his wet dress on it to just make them dry. And you type white rope. And after a while, you end up getting proposition for drop to hang yourself, proposition for getting suicide, and something like that, just because it's an association of idea. We used to have a very interesting game when we were young and unconscious and crazy. It was at the beginning of internet, maybe Netscape has just 6 months, 7 months. And our game was the following. We were beginning from one website, generally religious, and we were asking ourselves how many click on link you can do to begin with a religious website, let's suppose the Vatican webpage, and end up on a porn website. And you see, association of idea.
How many clicks did it take?
I think that the record at that time was 6 or 7.
Okay.
Meaning that it was the distance between heaven and, inferno.
So your research basically looks...
Just to say, I don't know which one is heaven, which one is inferno.
So your research basically illustrates how the Facebook algorithm limits choices online and how a filter bubble is created. And I think that's especially dangerous when it comes to hate speech or radical content online, as it just illustrated so nicely. What does the modeling of algorithms mean for our perception of the world, Ben? How does it influence how we see the world and how we are approached by other people?
So I think Kave's example is very nice because it sort of touches on the recommender systems that we experience constantly without necessarily knowing about it. So when there's a button on Facebook that says, do you want to be friends with this person? Or do you want to like this Mormon church, religious site, porn site, like any of those? There's a process behind that which decides what should be recommended to you. And that process is on any site that I can think of, unless you know of one that's different, in which case please tell us during the questions, we'd love to know about it. You don't know why you're being recommended what you're being recommended, you just know that they're somehow linked together, and because they're somehow linked together, there's some magic source, black box behind that helps make that decision. And so this is not just an issue when you're talking about recruitment, but it's also an issue when you're talking about the information that comes to you and processes you. I think the obvious analogy there is advertising. So everybody knows that advertising influences human beings. And I think it would be unfair to say that it doesn't influence us, because otherwise there's no good reason any large company could justify spending millions and billions of dollars on it. At the same time, most of the individuals that I know assume that they're not typically affected by advertising. So we go past a poster and think, it doesn't affect me. I just it's a nice Chanel. No. It never affects you personally. And so it's the same when you're using social media platforms. You have this feeling of stuff's being recommended, but it's just stuff that I want, right? And so because it's not transparent, and it's not obvious to me as a process how I'm being influenced slowly, periodically over time, it's also hard for me to understand how it's influencing my day-to-day decision-making, even though it obviously is, and we have documented academic research that is doing that both for economic, social, and political decisions.
Okay, thank you. And algorithms are not objective, I would say. Is it a fair conclusion, Kave? Algorithms are not objective, are they?
Indeed. Something that is quite, and I said it in the previous session also, I will repeat it, is that the fact that we are using complex language and we are using complex formulas, and so do not hide the fact that we are having an ideology behind the algorithm that we are using. Let me give you a very simple example. Let's suppose that on a hospital, as a computer programmer, I decide to use a database for checking the social security status of people that come to the hospital and for making a decision about them. This can be seen as a very natural decision. Everybody will go for a database. But clearly, something that we forget is that the database has its own logic that is different from the logic of the real world. Now, the fact that you are using the logic of a database for describing the real world is a decision that is not innocent unless you take care about it. Let's give the concrete example. Somebody come in front of the desk and said that I'm ill. I have an urgency. I have to have an operation right now. And the clerk check your status and you are not in the database. What will happen? In this case, there is two possibilities. One possibility is that the logic of the database is primordial to the logic of the real world, meaning that you are not in the database, you are not getting any treatment. Go back, go to Social Security, make yourself into the database, and I will give you service. The other solution is that the logic of the real world is primordial to the logic of the database. And in this case, I will say, I'm going to give you the treatment, and you go after that, and you make the database that all in all is a virtual view of the world compatible with the real world. Because you are real, you exist, you are in front of me, and I cannot say that because you are not in the computer, you don't exist. So, the decision of making a database or using a database by itself is not a subjective or an objective decision, it's not an ideological decision. But the decision to say that this is the database that has the primality or this is the reality that has the primality is an ideological question. And it should be seen and criticized as an ideological question.
And just to jump in there, I think there's significant and very concrete consequences where you can see that quite easily. Just as a question to the audience, who in the room is a woman with an academic degree of any kind? Please raise your hand. That's a lot of people. So there's a health club in the UK that assumes that if you have an academic degree, you must be male, and you can only be let into the male locker room. So I'm sorry, all of you would just have to go and get changed with the men. Now, I'm not sure how they feel about that and how you feel about that, but that's a computer system that basically assumes that you have an academic degree, therefore you must be male. I don't want to even go into the details of all of the layers of discrimination that entails, but more to say that if you take Kave's example to its logical conclusion, what it means is that we're creating societies where basically you have a large part of society which you, in most parts, can predict, 80%, 90%, 70%, and then you have a smaller part of society which is somehow deviant or unusual or does things that are unspecific and are not so easy to predict. And as a result of that, you become this, as Kave is calling it, this paranormal distribution. You become a ghost to the system. And these examples are incredibly difficult to measure. So anybody will have this example when you do air travel. As soon as you're not in the computer system, your ticket is not in the computer system, it doesn't matter if you have a ticket that is printed that you can show to the person. If you're not in the computer, you can't get on the aeroplane. And there's numerous processes like that where, for the vast majority, there's a very well-established functioning computer system, but as soon as you're one of the special cases, for whatever reason, and you're somehow complex, you cause additional administrative work, you cause administrative difficulty because you're somehow different, it's more and more difficult for you to interact and become part of the system. And so slowly but surely, as these predictive algorithms develop in different parts of society and computer databases become more common and become, as Kave was saying, sort of the primordial decision-making capacity over the real world, which is still then the real world in a non-digitized form, while they become the primordial capacity, it's increasingly difficult to be what is not normal, to be paranormal, even though there are numerous cases in which that's obviously the case and where essentially discrimination becomes the norm, the default setting of these decision-making processes.
So you are because there's data about you, more or less.
Pretty much. And not just you are who you are because there's data about you, but also if there's no data about you, you can't be counted and you don't matter.
Well, nice. Well, let's...
It's a great new world.
Yeah. Let's move back a little bit to the radical content stuff. There was not only ISIS, but there was also Charlie Hebdo, and there was also the Lee Rigby case that actually challenged governance as well as companies to take measures against radical content online. Can you elaborate a little bit on what measures were taken and how they did evolve?
Kave, do you want to maybe cover the French case, and I'll go for the British side?
You can begin.
Okay, so it's just, I think it's important to remember that when we're talking about ISIS and the context in which these decisions are taking place about what is a terrorist and what is not a terrorist and how terrorists do recruitment, it's also important to remember that it is not just these cases that are driving how governments and how societies respond to these challenges, but there's also the Charlie Hebdo case in France, and what's less well known but also extremely important in the United Kingdom is the Lee Rigby case, which is quite a tragic case where basically several soldiers were attacked with a machete, one of whom died. And so these cases are both cases where governments have tried to respond effectively to the challenges related to information about terrorists, who these terrorists are and trying to identify them. And of course, being governments, they then do things in the process of that are complex, difficult, and sometimes go too far, sometimes don't specify well enough. And genuinely, because these governments in all of these cases are under a lot of political pressure, they tend to push as hard as they possibly can and often tend to sort of ignore rule of law precedents or other things in the process. And so there's interesting examples both in the Lee Rigby case, whereas the British model tends to be to put an incredible amount of pressure on private sector organizations. That's basically the government going to private service providers and saying, you identified these people, why didn't you tell us? Or you identified these people, you took their content down, why aren't you doing this in an automated sense? Where you have governments seeing ISIS, seeing their soldiers being attacked with machetes, which admittedly isn't particularly nice, and the French government seeing people being gunned down in the center of Paris and feeling an obvious need to respond to that. They need to do something about this, and their electorate expects them to do something about this. But then as a result of that, it's very difficult to find obvious reasons to respond, because it's easy to say, we have this great technological solution, we can press a button and we'll give you a list of terrorists. And it's very hard to say there's social, political, economic conditions behind all of this. There are reasons that people become terrorists for all sorts of reasons. There are reasons that people engage in these attacks. And these may be far harder to define. There may not be a nice red button, and there may not be the perfect technical solution. So, Kave, do you want to go into a little bit in the French example?
Actually, there are different ways of discussing about this. One way is to take a political position or an activist position and saying that surveillance is unacceptable in any society, Chinese society or French society. And by the way, which is quite interesting, I'm just coming back from China. And when I was in China, I was hearing the discussion that was happening in the French parliament about this new surveillance law. And I was thinking to myself that the kind of argument that the French deputy, the French MPs are taking for voting in favor of surveillance, no Chinese official will take this position, and no Chinese official will accept to say this, meaning that all in all, the surveillance that have been voted in France conceptually is much more advanced than the surveillance that exists in China. With this difference that the Chinese have been on this topic for 10 years, 15 years, they have all the tools, they have all the systems, there are all the things, and they are not claiming that I'm doing surveillance for stopping terrorists. While in France, they have just begun to do it. They want just to deploy box. Their architecture is not able to do it, but still they are claiming that, they are saying that we are going to catch the terrorists.
So you're saying France has the less humble surveillance and China has recognized that it just can't be done?
China, from the beginning, had not the objective of getting all the terrorists. China, the position of the Chinese government is to say that I want to define red line. So you know that if you are crossing this red line, you will eventually have to take tea with the party.
But the red line is not shooting people.
It can be after, if you are shot at, you know why you have been shot at. But in the French case, you are not defining the red line. You are not telling them that you have been filtered, you have been monitored or so. The problem with the NSA case is not the fact that you are being surveilled. The difference in China is that everybody knows that he's surveilled. But in the NSA case or the French case, we don't know. But I don't want to take the activist position. I want more to go to the scientific and the scientist position and to ask myself, is what is being sold to people with political marketer, meaning that I'm going to do the surveillance and I will be detecting terrorists. I'm going to put this and I will be able to detect what they call weak signals. And so, is it possible or not? And for several reasons, we know that it is not possible. One very simplistic case is what is called the Bayesian fallacy, which is to say that if I know the probability that something conditional on something else, the inverse probability, I have no idea. For example, if I know that I have a drug that can detect the probability that somebody have a virus, and this drug is making a 3% error, so the probability that you get the test, and the test said that you have the virus, and the probability of this being a wrong answer being 3%. Now, if you ask from yourself, what is the probability that I get a positive test and I am really ill? You will see that the probability can be something around 40%. Meaning that this kind of device, because of their natural inability to do a good enough prediction, a good enough detection, they are in operational context completely useless. Another point, which is even more important, is that you have a real person that is traveling on a plane. And predictive algorithm is predicting that because this person is somebody that has been born in Middle East, he's traveling alone, he is between the age of 18 to 25, because he's wearing a Casio 911 black watch, because he have a bird like this guy is likely to be a bad boy. So I am going to monitor this person.
But
The risk, yes?
Who's defining that, actually? I mean,
Now, the fallacy is that we have done a lot of study and we have seen that the bad guys are 80% of time being born in Middle East, and they are 70% of time traveling without any suitcase, and so. So the fact that you are using this system is a big risk, because you can just, somebody that will try to get around it will just do the inverse and become, travel with many suitcases and change or use a person that has been born not in Middle East, that have not a Middle Eastern name, and you will have big issues. Meaning that, and I will tell it eventually later, because I think that the main risk there, I will say, is not the risk that happen on people that are surveilled. Indeed, I am worried about that. But what I'm more worried about is the effect that this, I will elaborate a little more later about that.
okay, well, so Ben, you said governments tend to put pressure on companies, but they don't improve the legal framework in order to prevent radical content from appearing online. I mean, those deals are made behind doors, and not only they exclude that those measures are discussed in a public debate, but they also undermine the rule of law, because no one can actually control those measures that are taken. Yeah, there's no legal way to control that. Code becomes more or less law. Furthermore, big companies such as Facebook, they operate as a virtual monopoly. So, do you think that it's better to have the state regulating freedom of speech, or then that a global company takes over this task?
I don't think there's a better or worse there. I mean, to try and respond to that question adequately, you have to look at the historic way in which governments have responded to challenges related to freedom of expression. So there's a history in Germany, in the UK, and France, and many parts of the world, where the initial response is simply to put pressure on companies, and then because you recognize that the states, you're not actually able to regulate companies in ways that you'd like to, perhaps, because, oh, there's this stupid thing called a constitution or a Verfassung which says, I'm sorry, that there's freedom of speech in your country. It's not an acceptable response, so you have to find other mechanisms, other ways of imposing through political pressure, through threatening with laws, through finding other ways of ensuring that companies do what you want, that they take certain mechanisms that you couldn't require them to do in law. And so that has challenges to the rule of law. But in the same way that there are challenges on those sides which sort of which lead to questions of human rights, there's also in the examples that Kave was mentioning. So when you look at a friend of mine calls these lines at the passport counter that you see when people are gone for a second check, 50 shades of brown, because basically if you're honest at the people who stand there, there's not a lot of white Europeans. So the credible response to that could be that everybody in this room should be growing a beard, change their name to a name that sounds like it's from the Middle East, and in solidarity with all of these people should be traveling on airplanes without luggage, and then hopefully there will be a better mix of people standing in these queues. The reality is that that's probably not going to happen, also because it's not a particularly pleasurable thing for many of the people in this room. So the difficulty is then you need to explain to many of the security services in many parts of the world that actually an existing population of people who have been caught in prison or considered to be responsible for certain types of events does not accurately predict a future population. And so that's a basic statistical challenge in conclusion, that you assume based on the people that you know that you will find the people who in future will be responsible. But that creates both statistical and logical fallacies in how you think about and how you imagine the people who are responsible for these things.
Coming back what you just said, Kave, what challenges are there else? I mean, what does it imply, what you just explained shortly? Because you said we can go on over this a little later, so let's do that.
So actually, going to what was said by Ben and also toward what you are asking me, actually I think that there is a major risk that exists there for people that are doing the surveillance. In fact, the fact that they are using big data and they are going to accept that these boxes can do something for them, can replace critical analysis, and will make them, in fact, becoming less and less able to think. The major risk that I see from this kind of system is the risk that is targeting the security officers. I am here in Germany, and I think that this place used to be in East Germany.
Yes? No?
Yeah. Who knows that?
Nobody remember what was the topography of Berlin before? It was in west. So some kilometer later, further, there is places that used to be in East Germany, and there is this very nice movie that was named The Life of Others, about this East German guy from the Stasi that get completely crazy by monitoring the other people. What I'm worrying is more about the ability, about the security services that, all in all, we are putting a part of the responsibility of taking care of our security in our hand. These kind of tools, in fact, will kill completely their critical ability, because they will just resort to use the big data in place of thinking about what they are doing. Now, if I go to the challenges that exist in big data, the challenges that exist in big data is that, first of all, the fact that generally we think that by using more and more data, we can get around some kind of fundamental challenges, scientific challenges that exist. First challenges is that data are never perfect. They have bias, they have errors, they have so. The fact that we have more data will not mean that I will be able to forget the quality of my data because I have more data. The second challenge that exists is a more fundamental challenge about the predictive ability of big data. Are we able to predict the behavior of a single person, or are we able to predict only the behavior of a group? If we are not able to predict the behavior of a single person, all the use of big data in the context of surveillance is completely useless. If I am only able to predict the behavior of a group of people, so the interest can become much less. And the third issue that we will have in the context of big data is that, as I say also in the previous session, the use of this kind of tools will change the behavior of people that are monitored and the people that are acted on. And it will make more and more difficult to follow them. Currently, one of the effects that had already NSA revelation has been that everybody is going to use encryption, meaning that it's almost impossible to detect nowadays who is just doing encryption to protect his privacy, to the person that is doing encryption for transferring secret, to the person that is doing encryption for downloading the last Justin Bieber show or something else. And for people that are interested about security, it's a big challenge.
And just as well, some of the challenges related to that, it's basically a question of what sort of societies, again, we're developing, and not just in the context of security. So both Kave and myself are with the Center for Internet and Human Rights here in Berlin, and a few weeks ago we had a conference specifically related to the ethics of algorithms, where algorithmically speaking, this is again this idea of the 80-20 society, algorithms and predictive models would try to make individuals as much as possible identical and predictable, and therefore similar as possible to each other. And so the challenge is when you're looking at the different similarities and the different challenges about it, you're constantly in situations where you're trying to imagine what might be predictive, what might be predictable, and what might, in those contexts, operators respond to those systems in certain ways, assuming that those predictions are correct. So there's many situations that we already know, for example, with aeroplanes that are self-driving or self-driving cars, that it's not so much that the system is more safe or less safe, that it comes with different challenges. So, for example, you become used to the fact that the system is automated, and then pilots have different sorts of challenges that they're not typically used to if they're not used to dealing with an automated system vis-a-vis a manual system. There's also situations where we're talking about, for example, algorithms related to insurance or related to predicting in healthcare systems, where the same difficulties apply, that if you believe too much in the ability of the predictive algorithm to predict, then you're constantly in a situation where you're stuck in a sort of a bias loop. And this goes all the way from the security sector, so predictive policing, security trying to identify who terrorists are, all the way then through to healthcare information related to insurance, all the way through then to social media and censorship in those areas. And so you see similar challenges across different areas where you're dealing with the same issues that are related to, at the end of the day, the intransparency of the algorithms. You can't see, and therefore you also have no ability even to know, let alone to decide about the algorithms that are recommending things, choosing things, making decisions in front of you, choosing which information you see, how you're selected and categorized, whether you can enter an aeroplane or not, whether you're a terrorist or not, but also that the opaqueness leads to different forms of discrimination that go across all areas, and that this isn't just an issue in the security sector, but it's also who can get access to healthcare, who can get a bank account, who can get access to insurance, and so it's cross-cutting in many different ways and many different aspects. And I think that the ISIS example, as beautiful as it might be with both Nutella and Kittens, is still an example that goes beyond ISIS itself, and the recommender systems that lie behind it are deeper and more deeply embedded in societies than many of us would like to believe or expect. And as a result of that, the next time you use a social media platform, the next time you apply for an insurance product, just think about the algorithm that is deciding whether you get it or not, because it's not that different from the algorithm deciding whether you get a friend request from ISIS.
Thank you so much for these insights. Now I would like to open the floor. Please raise your arms if you have any questions for our guests, and there will be a microphone in the room.
Okay. First one right here. That. Would you be so kind to stand up and shortly introduce yourself before we start the Q&A? Thanks.
Hi, my name is Sasha, and we did a talk on the IS in us this morning. My question to you from a scientific perspective, what can we do against ISIS, and also from a human rights perspective, what should we do?
So, first of all, let me to say some kind of statements, kind of legal statements. What I have been saying about Facebook is not specific to Facebook. I'm not saying that Facebook is a platform for helping ISIS to do recruitment. What I'm saying is about the use of recommendation algorithm and the power that the recommendation algorithm are taking. Now, what is the issue with recommendation algorithm? The issue with recommendation algorithm is that they will only propose you what they think is the best based on their algorithm. Meaning that the main issue that we have with the recommendation algorithm is that they are lacking diversity. So one way of dealing with this is, in fact, to increase diversity in the answer that you have. To accept that my algorithm will not only will not be perfect, but my algorithm has a likelihood of doing what is called in epistemology of statistics, radical error. Meaning that my model of the person is completely wrong, meaning that you should enforce the algorithm to not only propose what he believes is the best solution, but to randomly choose some other topic also to propose. And by the way, when you go into the theoretical analysis of the problem of recommendation, you will see that the solution of the problem of recommendation is an algorithm, is a probabilistic algorithm that will choose with some probability what is going to recommend, rather than choose the list of the propositions that are the most valuable for the company or that have the highest value to do. So this direction, I think, increasing the diversity and increasing the multiple voice that can exist in the system is something that is important. Second thing is that we have to make sure, uncover the ethical risk that exists in doing some kind of decision. Let me give you a very simple example. It's an example that I have given several times, but maybe in the audience people have not heard it. But some months ago, maybe less than 1 year ago, Oprah Winfrey, the very well-known American woman, that is a presenter that is a very wealthy person, by the way, goes to Zurich and go to a shop, and she asks to buy one Gucci bag. And the seller just tell her that, no, this bag is not your style. She said, no, I want this bag. So no, it's not your style, it's too expensive. Use this red bag that costs 10 euro or 10 franc. I said, no, I want this Gucci bag. And the seller do not give her. So she go to the police and she open a case for discrimination. And the ethical problem there is quite understandable. The seller see a black woman that is in jean and that is asking a Gucci bag that costs 3,000 euro. So she assumed that she is not able to buy it and she's not going to give it to her. Now, you go to any one of the online seller nowadays, Amazon or anyone other. Let me give you another example, Taobao, if you prefer Chinese website. And based on their recommendation algorithm, they will look at your profile, they will look at your previous buying, they will look at the place that you live, your name. Is your name more a WASP name or more a colored person name? And based on this, they will propose you to buy the expensive camera or the cheap camera. And the problem there of discrimination is exactly the same, but you are not seeing it. So we need also to uncover the ethical question that exists in this kind of situation, and by uncovering them, we will help into making the situation better.
So we also have to make the algorithms more transparent, I think. Like to understand what's behind, on what assumptions they are based, and what kind of ideology is behind them.
Now, making algorithm more transparent, from one perspective, people will say that there is nothing more difficult, more excruciating. There is no pain bigger for a programmer to check the code of another programmer. I have to say that everybody that had an experience of programming, he will prefer to go to the hell and spend 1,000 years than looking at 20,000 lines of code written in C or C++ written by somebody else. Meaning that transparency of algorithm does not mean that I should have their source code. I have no compiler in my mind. I can speak French, English, eventually Persian, but I cannot speak fluently Python. I can type fluently Python, but not speak it. The same problem exists with algorithm. But what we need to uncover, and we have to take into account as a transparency, we need to understand what is the ideology that is behind an algorithm. What are the hypotheses that are made in an algorithm? And this is something that we should learn to do.
Thank you. So, more questions? I am not sure that science is interested to do anything against ISIS or against anybody else. Politics can decide to do something against ISIS and can use some tools for going against ISIS. What we can do against ISIS, frankly speaking, from my opinion, is just to make people less accepting their propaganda. And the way that we have to do it is exactly to deal with the same way as we have been dealing with other type of crazy ideology, is to make the ideological debate alive in the society and to show
that this is not the way to go. The approach that exists these days of trying to put all Muslims in the same bag and say that ISIS is Islam, so all Muslims are like ISIS, is exactly, politically speaking, the wrongest way to deal with this, because you are pushing some people that have any acquaintance, any proximity with this kind of idea to fill in the same group, and this is what some of our politics, unfortunately, are doing.
And just to bridge on from that, I think that the challenge is that if science is talking about this, you're talking about more generalized challenges and more generalized problems. And so there's a strong debate in different parts of science about understanding what the paths are towards what's called radicalization. And this debate is heavily contested because there are groups within that parts of the scientific community that believe that the sort of radicalization is a natural process where you start off as a normal human being and at the end you become a more radicalized person, that there's one way to do that and that's what leads you to do it. And then there are lots of people that contest that model and say that there are other reasons to be involved in terrorist acts, as for example, money is an incentive, or there are other reasons to be doing that, and that the sort of simplified radicalization model itself doesn't very well explain why people end up going to places and blowing themselves up. So to also take that then generalized model even more specifically, there are many cases where, to my knowledge at least, many of these social media platforms have tried to make it more difficult to do these kinds of friend requests. So it's become more difficult, it seems, at least right now, for you to receive either Nutella or Kittens or a friend request from ISIS. So I'm sorry about the Nutella and Kittens. But in that context, it's still the case that it's a generalized problem and that it goes for many types of contexts of groups. It's nothing specific to ISIS specifically, but it's a generalized issue with platforms, it's a generalized issue in a society, and it's a generalized issue in research. I hope that helps to explain the question.
Does this answer?
By the way, you can never be friend with a kitten. Eventually he will accept you, but you will never be his friend.
Does this answer the question? Because otherwise I would say in terms of time management we move on.
Hello, my name is Felix. I think you've partly answered the question I wanted to ask, but maybe I'll try to take it to a more general level. So you've been talking about the filter bubbles that are created by these recommendation systems. How powerful do you think they are? So is it possibly that they are creating some kind of matrix or something so I can, or draw me into a direction that I initially wouldn't want to take? So my initial question would be the topic of radicalization. So how powerful are these filter bubbles?
So how powerful are filter bubbles?
You know, this is ongoing research. You know, currently the topic is a topic that interests a lot of PhD students, a lot of researcher, and by the way, I'm also myself doing some research on information extraction and analysis and so on. All in all, what we should be careful about is that, all in all, each one of the methods that we are going to use will be based on some kind of unsaid hypothesis, or even sometimes understood hypothesis that we are doing. And it's not the fact that our hypothesis will be better that will make our algorithm to be better. Very frequently, for making an algorithm to work better, we need to have stronger hypothesis and to reduce, in fact, the generality of the method that we are using. But still, you know, there is two ways of dealing with this kind of problem. One way is to say that, all in all, I'm interested about money. If an algorithm make a lot of money for the company that I'm working for, it's a good algorithm. If not, it's not. If the only risk of using an algorithm is to lose or to gain money, it's completely okay. I have no issues with using. But the problem is that sometimes we have some unexpected side effect. The example is the recommendation system that has been made initially for letting Facebook to do more targeted advertisement. And you have armies of marketers that will be very interested about this idea. And But when you see that this idea is misused for doing recruitment for extremist group, and the same idea is used, then you have to ask yourself, it would have better if I had made an algorithm that is less precise and worse, that was not helping or leading to this kind of situation. So returning back to education, to basic education, basic ethical education for computer scientists, this is something that we are clearly missing. And by the way, even if I decide today to do such a course, I'm not sure that we will have a lot of people in the community that will be able to discuss about this kind of topics.
And just to jump in there, I think there's an interesting example on what Kave said, and then a follow-up on the question about filter bubbles. Almost 40 years ago now, when the area of bioethics and sort of biosciences was developing, there were several large conferences around should human embryos be genetically modified. And there were quite leading academics and quite leading researchers in this area that basically started large initiatives in the scientific community and the academic community, but also in the research community, to sort of set red lines and to say these are the points and no further. And there are some elements of this in the sort of computer science world. There are ideas about what hacker ethics might be. But I think that there's sort of a reconsideration of what the ethical models are for computer scientists, particularly after Snowden and after the debates we've been having in the last few years. And I think there's a recognition, especially if you talk to the people who are involved, even in some of the most sort of aggressive algorithms or the most oppressive surveillance systems, once they actually become aware of the systems that they're part of, they start asking questions and they start wanting to understand the models that they're working on. And then once they have better understanding of those things, there then comes the question, so what do we do about it? And I think that there's sort of an overdue debate that needs to be had about the ethical models that then lead to those systems and that sort of manage those communities. At the same time, when we're talking about filter bubbles, I think the interesting thing is that we well know, based on research that in part was done by Facebook and sort of associated academics, that Facebook can potentially influence the participation in elections, that it can influence how people think about themselves, how they interact with their surroundings. We also know that the influences of Facebook and how it influences people's lives affect them not just when they use Facebook, but when they're offline as well. So not just with their electoral debates, but also how they're likely not just to vote, but also to speak and say things. And so there's obvious strong influences there, but we don't know nearly enough. And the challenge there will be, I don't want to make it sound like I'm too sympathetic for these large social media platforms, but it is a challenge when every time they try to do research and publish information about what they're doing and how powerful the platform is, the story in all of the newspapers goes along the lines of Facebook can do this and Google can do that. And the difficulty there is they can probably do a lot more. But because societies are so shocked that they can even do the small things that they're researching and publishing about, there's not even the opportunity or the possibility to have a serious engaged debate about the possible mechanisms that exist. And it's also very difficult to convince them to debate about shared data, to be able to understand better what these platforms are doing, simply because the platforms are still so closed that you need some kind of collaboration with them in order to have more generalizable things. So Kave can do his experiment for a small number of Facebook users, and that will work for 150. You can do those tests in those small scale, but at a large scale, to really get largely representative findings from these platforms, it's a lot more difficult unless you're collaborating with those providers. And they're almost disincentivized because we, as societies, are starting to understand just how powerful they are, and people start freaking out as soon as they read the research.
Just to give another continuation in what Ben said, the study that I just described to you about the profile, we decided to not publish it yet, mainly because we had issues with it, some ethical issues that we're having. First ethical issue that we were having with this study was that first of all, the recruitment process of ISIS began to change in November, December last year. So we had almost no any more contact with them from that time. The other point was that we were beginning to wonder if the contact that we are getting are from ISIS or they are from the security offices in Occidental countries. The third issue was that we were using some students to do the study, and we begin to worry if the anonymity of the user, of the student that we're faking the profile is maintained. So for this reason, we decided a little to step back. There was another problem that was, I'm not a journalist, so I'm not interested about doing, you know, a kind of scoop type of stuff. I prefer to be able to publish this in a journal. And if I was myself the reviewer of such a work, I will ask some question about the bias, the fact that what is the effect of the initial cause that you choose on the result, and so it was very difficult for me, that I'm not a sociologist, to do a quantitative paper on this. Currently we are trying to get some sociologists to work with us and to make a more deeper study, so this is why I have not yet published it.
Unfortunately, we are running out of time, so if there's one more question, maybe we can take it, and then I'm afraid we have to close down the session.
Hi, my name's Seema. Two things. First thing, Ben, to that health club in the UK, thankfully it's not all academic women, it was only women who have a PhD. That was the problem. If you put down doctor, whatever, they put you in the men's section, which is bad enough, but still. In the beginning, you said if anyone knows of any site, any search engine, whatever, which doesn't collect data, you know, kind of speak up and so on. I've had the experience that in Germany we do have quite a few, and I think in Germany...
It wasn't about data collection.
Sorry.
It was specifically about making transparent how the algorithm decides.
Well, so if you take, for example, in Germany, I know a fair few people who use pages like Start Page and so on instead of Google, but then they get extremely, excuse my language, pissed off that they don't get the results they are expecting, because everyone has gotten so used to using Google, Bing, Yahoo, whatever, that they basically go back to it. And I think, as you just said, that people, you know, once they find out, oh my gosh, Facebook is collecting all our data and whatever, people are freaked out at one point, but at the end of the day, I do believe this is mainly maybe not an academic, but kind of an academic recognition that these companies are gaining too much knowledge, but I don't think the average person in the world, in the Western world, inverted commas, is actually interested in the moment is there where you're just like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with them? But I think convenience trumps everything else. I don't know if that's just a pessimistic view of the development we're going for, but I'd be interested in hearing what you say to that.
Sure. So the issue that we were specifically discussing and that Startpage nor any other site that I'm aware of resolves is the process from the data you input to the outputs that it produces and what's in between, basically, what the algorithm is that's being used. And so as a result of that, there are almost no sites that I'm aware of, at least, that allow you to make that process transparent. And so saying that people may not be interested or may not concerned about it, I'm not sure that's a particularly academic debate. I think that when academic research about this is published, that goes along the lines of Facebook would be capable of tipping who votes in the US elections, people notice it, and people do get quite angry, concerned, upset, many different things. In that sense, the media debate has been very successful. It's almost that the media debate has been too successful, because I think there's more need for more of a debate of that kind, and there's more need of a recognition of the power of these systems within our society to influence these kinds of decisions, not just elections, but in all possible walks of life and in all possible areas. And I think that every time some quality piece of academic research comes out, it's not just an academic debate, it gets quite significant press in many parts of the world, even though if that tends to be quite one-sided, because what we need to have as a debate is not just, wow, Facebook can do this, but okay, Facebook can do all of these things, or Google, or any other large platform with large amounts of data processing power and eyeballs on it. And people are used to it. You're totally right. People are used to these platforms and processes, so it's extremely difficult to get unused to them in some way. That's part of where the monopolies come from, or the quasi-monopolies that many of these sites have. So then the challenge is, they're used to it. They have massive effects on the society. At an individual level, it makes sense. So at an individual level, it makes sense for an individual consumer to say, I just want the thing I'm used to. But at a collective level, it might be the case that a large social networking platform would never dream of changing or tipping the US election, but they might be perfectly happy to do it in another country in the world. And the question is then, how does any other country in the world, be that Lebanon, Spain, South Africa, or any other possible country that you can imagine, how do those individual countries feel about that? And how does also the US feel about the fact that these portals are becoming incredibly powerful? As a collective level, not an individual level.
Thanks very much. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. I guess if there are any further questions, the attendees and speakers will be open to answer further questions outside the panel. So thanks again very much. And we're going to start